Thank you for attending and welcome to Predicting the TV Content Consumers Crave. I'm Jonathan Hurd, and joining me are three panelists. I'll have them each introduce themselves and tell you about what they do. So Sherry Brennan.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm Sherry Brennan. I work for Fox Networks Group down in LA, or up in LA, I guess, from here. You probably all know Fox as a brand, but you may not realize the breadth of our portfolio. We have the broadcast stations you're familiar with. We also have a suite of channels under the FX brand, FX, FXX, and FXM. We have National Geographic and that suite of channels, and Fox News and Business News, and then we have, of course, Fox Sports. So that's a series of national and regional sports networks that serve, the regional sports networks serve about 70% of the country. So our portfolio is really, really broad and focused around those core brands I just mentioned. My particular role there is selling those brands to what we call new entrants or virtual MVPD clients like Hulu Live and YouTube TV. And I also have a strategic research function where I'm working on keeping track of some of the trends we'll talk about today. I'm a huge consumer of research and try to keep our executive team sort of supplied with the latest data on what's happening in this space. And I also look after special markets, so things like universities, cruise ships, airlines, hotels, that kind of business. So it's kind of a little bit of a jack of all trades role, but I really like it.
Great. And Stu?
Yes, Stu Barnes with Vimeo. So obviously, as Sherry looks after like the sort of tier one part of the market, Vimeo, as you may or may not be aware, is kind of really focused on the mid to long tail. My team is really responsible for the, I guess, the sort of custom solutions for people who want a more negotiated partnership with Vimeo than just the sort of credit card engagements that we're famous for. So yeah, we're moving a lot into OTT these days through an acquisition we made of a company called VHX. We're doing a lot more live through an acquisition of a company called Livestream. And so yeah, my team is kind of responsible for those solutions. So yeah, we have good visibility in terms of what the trends are in that sort of mid to long tail of content producers.
Great. And Michele?
You rounded out this panel very nicely, if I think about it, because I kind of finalize it. So my name is Michele Edelman. I work for a company called Vubiquity. Vubiquity is a premium content services provider, distribution provider. We sit right between the content owners and all the video distributors, and basically are the in-between. So we've got about 650 content owner relationships. We also do licensing for them. And on the other side, we've got just under 1,100 video distributors. And that's everything from cable, satellite, telco. And we own a company up in Toronto called Juice. They do all of our OTT distribution. We're an end-to-end video distributor. And my role in the company is I run all global marketing, both on the kind of brand marketing side for Vubiquity, but for the most part, it's working with our content owners and video distributors so that they are capable of kind of building their services and going to market with them. I also run a content strategy group, and we developed this because of everything that was shifting in the marketplace. So we were starting to be entertained by what we call, as Sherry was saying, these new entrants and people that were coming into the marketplace that wanted to launch a full scope service. We needed a team of people that were really content savvy that could go ahead and put together a programming model for them, whether they were a niche service or whether they had their own content. So we've been working really diligent on those kinds of things. We've noticed a lot of kind of IoT guys coming into the marketplace. Anyone who has a screen who's distributing to a screen has been knocking on our door for content. So it's been a really exciting time for us.
Great. Thank you. And my name is Jonathan Hurd. I'm a director with Altman, Vilandrie and Company. We are a strategy consulting firm focused on technology, media, and telecom, and about 140 people with offices in Boston, New York, and San Francisco. And let me just see if perfect. We have been running a video survey over the last really 8 years, focused on a wide range of topics to keep track of what consumers are doing, consumer behavior, consumer interests. As you can see, there are a number of different areas that we cover. Last summer, we actually did a capability to look at 150 different live TV channels, and for 5,000 respondents, we're able to obtain their preferences, consumers' preferences, and willing to pay. So we're able to simulate what the take rate would be of new virtual MVPD services like Hulu with live TV, YouTube TV, et cetera. And we continued that this year, but we also realized that for some consumers, the paradigm of live TV channels is eroding a bit. And it's really more about the programs than the channels on which they appear to some consumers. Obviously, there's still a role for live TV channels, but we wanted to understand what are consumer preferences around individual channels. And we used 2 different instruments, a what to watch and a what to subscribe to. So what to watch is if someone has 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes to watch something, what is that going to, what are they going to choose and why? And then what to subscribe to, similar thing, what content is in an SVOD package, what's the price, and what are some of the other features. So this is going to provide fodder for our panel discussion, but I'll spend a few minutes going through some of the findings. So one thing that isn't a surprise is that people are gravitating more and more toward online for TV shows and movies. And because we've been conducting the survey over the course of a number of years, we have a kind of longitudinal view of this. You can see across all age ranges, 2011 versus 2017, quite a big jump in the percentage of people that say they watch TV shows or movies, so long-form content through online sources. But you can also see the difference by age range. So 55-plus aged consumers haven't even caught up yet to where the 18 to 24-year-olds were even 6 years ago. So these age-related behavior differences are critically important in terms of thinking about what people are going to pay for and what they're going to watch. And also to show how powerful online platforms have become, we asked which form of video are you more likely to turn on when you don't have a plan for what you're going to watch. And the dark bar here is online video services. The light bar is traditional TV, cable or broadcast. And you can see how, again, very age-related, nearly 80% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they turned to online sources first. And 55 plus, it's 2/3 are turning to traditional. We asked this question last year, by the way, and it was only about 20% or so of the 55 plus that said they turned to online. So there has been growth in online, but again, very age-related differences. So I mentioned earlier programs and how much they drive consumer interest and a willingness to pay. We looked at 169 programs from traditional networks to understand, for all of these 5,000 respondents who took the survey, how much they value these programs as part of a service. I'm not going to go through them all, obviously, and you may not even be able to read them in the back of the room, but wanted to show you the breadth of programs that we looked at across a variety of genres from the major networks. We also looked at 32 made-for-digital programs. So these are more web series. We wanted to see how, by the way, I should have mentioned in the previous page, we had Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu as traditional program sources. Even though they're obviously delivered online, they're effectively making shows that are indistinguishable in many ways from what traditional networks make. But made for digital is a bit different. These are more web series, and you can see from a variety of different players across really 4 broad genres. And again, a genre isn't a perfect way of categorizing programs because, what is Game of Thrones? Is it a mature drama? Is it a fantasy series? So, depending on how you think about it, it could fall into different buckets of genres. But across the various age ranges, we asked people, which of these shows would you consider a must-have for a TV service? And again, age-related, the younger consumers are much more likely to pick more programs in around 28 for 18 to 24-year-olds, 33 for 25 to 34-year-olds, and the must-haves for 55 plus are only 13. So this is exactly the same kind of behavior we saw when we had a similar survey that looked at channels. Older consumers have much more concentrated interest in a few channels, and in this case, a few programs, than 25 to 34-year-olds who typically pick either the most channels or the most programs as part of their service. And also, speaking of age-related differences, again, hard to read in the back of the room, I fear, but the top 30 programs by a MaxDiff score. The way to think about that is imagine allocating 100 points across all of these 201 programs. How do these programs rate by age range? Game of Thrones is at the top for both 18 to 24 and 25 to 34. It's also near the top for 35 plus. But one of the things that's striking is these different color codes are the shows that are not in the top not in the top 30 for age 35 plus. So Stranger Things is number 3 for both 18 to 24, 25 to 34, but it's not in the top 30 for those who are age 35 plus. And there are a variety of other differences. So when you're trying to create a service with the shows that consumers want, you have to take into account what age range are you mainly focused on, and what are the different preferences of those age ranges. What we're showing here is when we ask people about what SVOD service they would prefer in a conjoint instrument, which is a trade-off instrument. It says over and over to survey respondents, would you rather have A or B? And all else being equal, which would you pick? And the attributes that are on the left, like device and program descriptor, are the ones that mattered most to people when they were choosing an SVOD service. And in this case, actually, it was a what-to-watch conjoint instrument. We had 2 different versions, one for subscribing to an SVOD service and one for what would you watch. And so the situation was, let's say you had at least 10 minutes to watch a program. Which of these programs would you watch? And we varied the device, the program descriptor, the brand of the platform, how it's consumed, live or on demand, the program length, and then other features related to advertising primarily. So one of the key takeaways is device. You see higher on the page is better, and you see TV at the very top. So TV, all else being equal, is by far the most preferred device, and smartphone way at the bottom. It's pretty much parallel with screen size. Another really interesting takeaway was on program descriptor. We ended up asking people about their favorite programs. So let's say we're talking about Modern Family, for example. Let's say that was somebody's favorite program. We would have 4 choices of programs. One was from the makers of, and it would say Modern Family. Starring, and it would have their favorite star from Modern Family. Created by ABC Network, in this case. Or in the comedy genre. And what's really fascinating is people gravitated toward from the makers of whatever the show was, and we named the show. In other surveys, when we ask people what's the most important thing about choosing what you're going to watch, the creators and producers tend to finish at or near the bottom. And we think it's because consumers think they don't know who the creators and producers are, which is generally true. But if you actually name a program, from the creators of a program that they're familiar with, it actually scores very high. And You could see Netflix finishes in the top among brands. And one of the other interesting things is that program length, 60 or 30 minutes tended to be preferred by far, with 10 minutes at the bottom. So, for content and these programs that people are familiar with, it may not work to have snippets that run for 10 minutes in length. So diving into some other findings from this, by age range, if you look at how 18 to 24-year-olds respond to the device question, closer together here means they are less sensitive to that particular attribute. So older consumers far more sensitive to TV versus other devices than younger consumers are, which isn't that surprising. But it may be somewhat surprising that even for 18 to 24-year-olds, TV is still, by far the most preferred device. So one of the things that we're able to do, because we have, for 5,000 respondents, we know what programs they're willing to pay for in an SVOD service and how they value other features, we can actually construct simulations where we say, what would happen if we change the price of a service or change the programs in a service? So we looked at Netflix, and if we were to change the price of Netflix where it is today from the dotted line, and actually they did change the price since we ran the survey in the summer. So, but at the time, looking at the demand level that we get, 100% demand at $10 a month, what would happen if we raised the price? And you could see at $20, they lose about 40% of their subscribers. So this isn't something they're going to run out and do overnight, obviously, but it does show that revenue increases as they raise the price. So it's not surprising that Netflix, with fairly low price elasticity, would be doing price increases. They're going to lose subscribers versus what they would have otherwise if they kept price lower, but it does show that, that they are relatively inelastic, and this is in contrast to virtual MVPD services and traditional pay TV services where there's so much competition that people either drop the service or switch it if they're faced with price increases. And then another thing we're able to do is look at sensitivity to programs. So because we have all of those 201 different programs, we can actually add them to or remove them from services to create hypothetical news services. Or in this case, what would happen to Netflix if they dropped their top 5 Netflix originals? And these, by the way, are top 5 in terms of the percentage of consumers that say they must have this program. So the top 5, you can see Stranger Things, obviously, at the top. And then we had the next 5 after those top 5. So the lines are on the curve. The curves here are, what if we drop those programs? How much demand do they lose? And their demand goes down by about 14% if these top 10 programs were removed from the service. So this shows the value of that original content to Netflix, how important it is to their overall take rate. So those are some of the highlights from our research. If you either give me your card or send me an email, happy to send you these slides and other findings. But let's turn over now to our panelists. And I guess let's start with an overall question of what's your reaction to this? Is there anything that jumps out at you that's either surprising or reinforces the beliefs you've had about the market?
Can I just point something out?
Yes.
Modern Family is actually created by Fox. It just airs on ABC.
All right. Well, that is very important to now. See, that's something people would generally not know, right?
So I think that it's interesting. I have another question for you too, which is, if the value of the top 10 shows on Netflix is 14% of their subscribers, then what's the ROI on the investment in those programs?
It's really, I was very hesitant to put up anything with a dollar sign on it in front of that, but it came down to, for the US subscriber base, about $5 million per episode, which is, in terms of revenue hit, which is more or less what they're spending per episode, but they get a global audience for that, first of all. So there should be some pretty good ROI on top of a break even. And the other thing is that you have to take into account that these are the top shows. And when they make an investment in content, it's not guaranteed to be a top show. There's risk involved as well. So those factors balance out. But it seemed interesting that it was right around what has been reported, at least, is what they're spending.
Well, they're sort of an analytics-driven production
Yeah.
outfit, so that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
they're doing their job. I think it's really interesting that TV comes out on top in terms of devices, and not particularly surprising to me, but from where I sit in the company and the companies that come in and pitch me on stuff, I think a lot of them would be surprised to see that. And you saw that happen and play itself out with YouTube TV a little bit, where they launched with mobile apps first, and the only way to get YouTube TV on a TV was through Chromecast or AirPlay. And recently, I think last week, they came out and said, well, guess what? People are watching an awful lot on TV, and therefore now they're starting to roll out TV apps. I think it just validates your findings.
Yeah. Stu, any top-level takeaways here?
It's a few thoughts. Firstly, as a proud Brit, very sad to see the Crown only down in number 10 there. But sort of joking aside, so a couple of observations. So at Vimeo, when we're sort of helping people launch their OTT services in the sort of mid to long tail, they don't have big kind of analytics-based marketing departments and research departments, so they just have no idea what to price things at and so on. And so we kind of built out some quite nice BI tools. And what we've seen from an aggregate is that actually there isn't quite the same level as price sensitivity between $5 and $10 as was shown on your graph, which was a huge drop-off of like 80%. And so, yeah, we actually tend to advise people who might be, thinking, well, look, Netflix is $10. We need to be at less than $5 because we're a niche service with way less content. We would actually say, of course, you have to be below Netflix because that's a psychological. I think they kind of define what is an acceptable price point for a SVOD service. But it's a lot easier to drop the price than it is to put the price up. So we would encourage people to kind of start, just be bold and start at like $8 or something and see what happens. And then you can always run promotions. You can always, drop the price and experiment. But yeah, we have not seen that level of price sensitivity at the $5 to, let's say, $8 range. The other thing is I totally endorse the TV as the preferred platform. And when we're talking premium content, obviously, I mean, there is a whole sector of a handful of which you address there who really do contemplate the mobile and kind of social platforms as where people will consume them. And so, the Rooster Teeths of this world, this is why kind of vertical video became a thing, because there is no doubt that there is vast consumption of a different form of video on those platforms. And so, yeah, I think in the context of the long-form premium shows that you've surveyed here, no surprise at all. But of course, there is an entire another industry which is growing rapidly. Refinery 29 was on your list, Rooster Teeth, the Dodo. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. For whom the TV wouldn't even register there would be no consumption on the TV. So I think it's important to remember that there is an entire different world that contemplates those sort of platforms.
So Jonathan, I love your data. You know that. I just love going to dinner with him and just talking about data and assumptions and things. He's one of the smartest people I know. So it's really interesting if we think about this. We had networks, then we had online, then we had Netflix, but if we really think about it and go back just a bit and say to ourselves, what was that tipping point where everything started to really move? And I have 3 words for you. It's called House of Cards. House of Cards was the first kind of, exclusive to one service that had been relatively popular and people were using it and it was starting to grow. But it wasn't until that did their trajectory start to take off. And it was like all of a sudden there was this really unique show, and Netflix was telling us that they kind of ran all their analytics and their data, and the way that they got to this was because people were watching movies with, what's his name? I can't say it. About politics, and this show came up, and all of a sudden it was like, here it is. And it took off. And then all of a sudden, everyone behind them was like, okay, we need original programming. And then all of a sudden, it became just about the programming. So I agree with you that it's about the content, and people will go where the content is. There's a series out there called Outlander. And if you ask the average person, they're going to say, oh, yeah, we know that. We've watched it. And then you ask them, what network is it on? Where do you watch it? And it's like, it's a little, you stumbled a little, like, good question. It's popularity. It's word of mouth. It's marketing. It's your next door neighbor. It really comes down to the shows and how people want to spend their time, occupy their time. We don't have a lot of it today, and we don't have a lot of it today because of everything we're doing. And I truly believe that it comes down to that intellectual stimulation that you're getting from these series that are just, driving you in. And I think it also has to do with, I'm not surprised when you showed the stats on Stranger Things, because I think I have a pretty savvy friend base that watch content. I live in Los Angeles. I work in this industry. Everyone's talking about kind of what they're watching, what they're consuming their time with. And I have a mixed bag of friends who some are watching Stranger Things, some are not. And when I ask why not, it comes down to it's kids. They feel like it's kids. I'm like, okay, but the real core of it is something else there. What is it about the kids? I'm like, I just can't watch the kids. Okay, got it. But makes sense.
Right.
So it goes back to that. One thing I do want to say, though, I applaud Scripps networks, because there are those people that just say, I watch Bravo. Like, they sit down, but a lot of it is that it's not, is it intellectually stimulating? I don't know. But there are, and now there's this whole, Bravo wives, Bravo husbands. It's taken off on this whole thing where the husbands know all about the shows and things. It's hysterical. But it's become this trend. So I applaud them for finding that kind of niche that their network has become this brand. No matter what's on, people just sit down and turn it on and watch it.
So you mentioned, I don't watch Stranger Things because of its kids, right? And there are these very big age-related differences, not only in the programs people want to watch, but also the devices they consume on. There are some differences as well. How do you all cope with that, or do you? Is that something you generally think about? Which segment are we appealing to, or do we have a balance, or do we have a network that is focused on a particular age range, or how does that affect your kind of day-to-day jobs?
Most of our content is sort of must-watch, broad-based, mainstream-focused content. We're not really targeting a particular demo, in terms of a company, but programming, by either different day parts or different shows, different brands, different of our core brands. Fox News obviously skews older than FX, but that's not to say they don't have any young audience. They have a real sizable audience across the board. So we do look at that, and I think where we have, if we have a network that's too focused around one age demo, we'll try to broaden it out by bringing in other content and trying to bring in additional viewers so that we get a sort of a broader swath. But I think our content's pretty mainstream, so we tend to cover the whole gamut pretty much. I guess you guys probably see that more.
Yeah, so and it's almost the polar opposite, as our services are typically so niche that the people powering them know exactly who they are targeting with such specificity. It's untrue, and a lot of cases it's people who have a YouTube audience, and there's a genre we've seen particularly successful is like fitness, yoga, wellness. So Yoga with Adrian being a classic example, and many others, but that's a really good example where she's beloved on YouTube, and she probably has a pretty decent, I don't know, let's say high five-figure business, from YouTube share of ad revenue and stuff. But she basically wanted to convert her YouTube audience into a direct subscription audience. Interestingly, the content on Yoga with Adrian SVOD is not radically different to what's on YouTube, but I think because she's so beloved, her fan base wanted to contribute towards her success. And so I think the figures that, when I spoke to her about it, were the conversion from YouTube to her S4 channel was ridiculous. It was like 40% or something like that. And so I think, as I say, in our world, it is the complete opposite of yours, where people know. So her addressable audience was basically her YouTube audience, who she had a direct conversation with, who therefore she could encourage to convert. And there are other examples like. A huge success in the sort of long tail that we power is called Vet TV. It's basically it's marketed as like the Comedy Central for military veterans. So about as niche as you really can get. Not only a service addressing servicemen, but a comedy service addressing servicemen. And that's got tens of thousands of subscribers. Because, of course, it can be marketed to in an incredibly focused way. I think your question was kind of also alluding to what platforms do you target for these different audiences. Frankly, yeah, our customers, our approach is just get to them all and see what works, and then you can invest in, marketing to those different platforms. So interestingly, you've got Roku, which has got huge adoption. And so a lot of people really feel they have to be there, but has got relatively high churn in our experience, whereas Apple TV, lower adoption, but once someone subscribes through Apple TV, they will stay with you for an awfully long time. So yeah, that's what we encourage people to do, is get everywhere. That our guys know who their audience is, absolutely. They market to them, and yeah, based on the metrics that they get back, they then tweak the sort of retention and further acquisition approaches based on what they see on different platforms.
I think your very first question you were talking was about screen size and screens
right,
for the most part.
Right.
And two interesting observations. The first is, I'm curious to know when we do studies and ask people about screens that they watch on, I always want to know, is screen size about choice or convenience? Because we are now watching content all throughout the day. In some cases, 8 or 10 hours a day, which we never did before. So we're watching it where we are with what we have. So 9 times out of 10, it's a small screen or a computer. There are those folks, you always laugh. They say, I'm sitting in my living room with a 65-inch television and I'm watching something on my phone. Few and far between. But the truth is it convenience or is it choice? That's my first question. I think it's convenience. I really do. I think everyone is it's that convenience factor. It's where they are. It's what they have. It's, they're kind of taking a break and finishing a show. I mean, I will admit that I was so obsessed with Stranger Things. I can watch shows about kids that I watched like the last episode in my car once. I was like waiting to go somewhere and I just I was like, oh, here I am, gonna watch it. I'm gonna finish it, so I did.
But TV is the least convenient screen, so why does it come out on top?
Because again, the question is that what you want or is that what you do?
Well,
right?
also, we did say, imagine you're at home with
Yeah,
at least 10
right,
minutes.
there's
So
al-
that
yeah, it's always
automatically
the-
sort
right.
of confines it.
Okay.
But I think it does also show that if you had a service that were available only on a smartphone
Right.
or only on a mobile device,
Yeah.
you're really limiting your demand.
Absolutely, I think it's gotta, it really has to be everywhere, and you kind of grab for, we have, I think today, or I should say in the United States, I definitely don't want to go outside, we have multiple screen sizes in our lives. So we're gonna kind of choose the one that's there or close by. So that's my first observation, like, is it convenience or is it choice? The second is, has anyone ever watched a horror movie on a small screen? It's not scary. It's kind of funny because when I work a lot with the studios and taking their movies into the digital window, and there was always this, well, if it did well in theatrical, it's going to do well in the digital space. And we actually had these statistics. There's going to be a variance here. Here's the reason why. Or when I was working at a studio and we were putting our horror films on iTunes, and the horror films never performed because people were watching them on small screens and they just weren't scary. So I think that screen size has something to do with it for sure. I think that the choice of programming. Listen, there was a company that I'm gonna take you back not that far, but Go 90. They were all about Go 90, watch it this way, and
Still exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still exists, but it didn't
take off.
take off.
But they didn't have great content either.
Didn't have great content. So they didn't have great content, and it was pretty much just there, so it was limited.
And I don't know, this isn't necessarily addressing the question, but on the subject of Go 90, I think their demise has been sort of prematurely announced. They're powered. I bet Verizon has just made an obscene amount of, learned a huge amount from that, if nothing else. And so Verizon isn't going anywhere.
Everyone who learned anything is left.
Well, all right, fair enough. But I don't know. I might be. I don't know. I might be one of the few who actually think that they'll figure it out at some stage, because they're not. Yeah, they can't. I bet even in and of itself, it's probably been providing them with some really useful information, and they're so big that they will figure it out at some stage. I think.
Cool. Questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm just curious on your evaluation of preferred screens, if you will. Did you look at input at all? And the reason I ask is because I have an 8-year-old son who has all these options and despises the television because he doesn't like the remote versus the touch screen on tablets or other devices. Have you looked at the EPGs and those as we get more channels, it's more difficult to navigate?
It's a great question. And the question was for the benefit of the recording, did we look at input at all to the devices? And we did have a question on remote preferences. And one of the things we found is over the years, voice and gesture controls have gone up pretty dramatically over this period of time. Smartphones actually score pretty well as a choice of remote with younger consumers, but it was a remote for a TV. We didn't get as specific as the situation with your son and preferring a touch screen rather than another screen. But that is another. I mean, it's a great point about navigating all of this content that's there now. And I think panelists, would you agree that in general, navigation combined with search and discovery are all some of the toughest challenges that the industry faces today?
Yep, that nut has not been cracked.
No. Yeah. Any other question over here? Yes.
Sure. We're talking a lot about subscription. For me, I've noticed a lot more of carrier partnerships. For
Viewpoints on partnerships, carrier partnerships versus subscription.
Well, I think the services like Netflix and others who are trying to grow their subscriber bases are looking for partners who have screens in people's homes or hands, right? So that's sort of a natural partnership, I think, to try to grow the Netflix business. And in the case of mobile phones, they have a vested interest in stickiness, increasing stickiness, so keeping people subscribing to their cell phone service, right, as opposed to going from T-Mobile to Sprint or something. So I think they're finding it a very natural affinity to do that. That's why I think you're starting to see those happen as things like Netflix is, arguably maturing a bit and finding probably growth slightly harder, at least in the US. So they're looking for other kinds of ways of being in consumer homes, and cell phones make a lot of sense. They don't traditionally have successful video products of their own, right? None of the carriers have really done anything that has worked all that well in that space. And it's expensive for the carriers to go out and license all the content, so going with an aggregator to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The only other comment I'll make is that on TV Everywhere, which is the other thing you referenced to, bystand, you need a cable subscription to authenticate with it. I think from your survey that was still not, stunningly well received, but I think that has improved materially over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, it may be too late, but I think at least, the user experience is way better than it was a while ago.
We did see material improvement in TV Everywhere awareness this year.
Yeah,
It was like stagnant for at 36% for several years, and now it's up in the, I think 43% or so. So it's gone up a bit. But still, I mean, that's not a very high awareness level.
No, for sure.
Yes, question here.
So what do you think is the appetite for innovative new content as opposed to content that the data tells you is popular already, so you should make more or buy more of that? So is there any kind of set aside in the industry to say, look, we're going to put this aside this money to fund content that we have not seen here on the data? Not sure if there even exists such category.
Well, sure there is. I mean, every single year on every single network, they premiere new shows that nobody's ever heard of. Now, a lot of times they do try to link them back to something you have heard of, right? Like The Orville premiered here on Fox this year, and that had a very famous creator, right? So we made a lot of that. But you do see shows that nobody knows anything about on all kinds of networks. So I think you become familiar with the hits and you are less aware of the non-hits, but there are a lot of non-hits out there. So there's a lot of money spent in the industry on content that is experimental. I think that's one of the great things about the content business is there's especially today, there's Vimeo and other platforms like you guys that make content available that no one's ever heard of, and that it would not be able, it would not sort of rise to being able to be on a broadly distributed national broadcast network or cable network, but people can find it, and in rare cases, the stars from those go on to have sort of wider audiences. But I think this is the heyday of that, really.
Yeah, I think. So you're right. I mean, at Vimeo, pretty much everything we do, or everything that is done on our platform, I would say, is in that experimental kind of realm. I mean, every month we have a screening of the staff picks, and I mean, some of them are pretty out there. But I think as a community service, we've spoken to some of the actual creators, and you're right. If someone is a Vimeo staff pick, a number have said to me, look, that has basically been my way into Hollywood. A week after I got a staff pick, I had my first contract in Hollywood. So from our perspective, that is pretty much all we do, is try and surface interesting experimental stuff and help these creators get the big breaks.
Cool. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I've been asked to remind you that there's now a coffee break occurring. But please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for attending.